Good morning, students. In today's class, I will explain how objects can be passed as arguments to member function and also how objects can be returned from the member function of a class. In our last class, we learned about defining a member function of a class outside the class and the concept of array of object and also how one object can be copied into another object using assignment operator. In today's class, we will be learning about two important concepts. One is passing objects as arguments to member function of a class and also how object can be returned from the member function of a class. At the end of today's class, you will be able to understand how we can pass objects as arguments to member function of a class and how objects can be returned from the member function of a class. To, to understand the concept of objects and object passing objects as arguments to a function, I've taken with a simple example of complex class. So, in our last class, we learned several examples of objects and classes. In all the examples we have considered, we consider only those functions where no argument, no return value. We know that any function, whether it's a member function of a class or a normal function, functions in C++ or C are of three categories. Function one is function without argument, without return value. Function with argument, without return value. Function with argument and with return value. But in the example that we have considered so far, we consider only those functions for which no argument, no return value. But today class, I will be taking some examples of program where we can pass objects as arguments to function, but the function will not return any value or any objects. So class complex. So here the class name is complex. Under the private access specifier, declare all the private member data. The two private member data are real and image of float type. Next, public. So in the this function or this class has four member function: read complex, write complex, add complex, subcomplex. Out of that one, we already learned about read complex and write complex. When we look at the prototype, we can easily understand that first two function, read complex and write complex, belongs to the category of function without argument, without return value. The last two, third and fourth, add complex and subcomplex, belongs to the category of function with argument and without return value. The arguments are objects. So here, just I have mentioned the prototype of all the four functions inside the class. I have defined each and every function outside the class. In our last session, we learned about how we can define a member function outside the class. If you are defining a member function outside the class, the syntax is first mention the return type, one space, mention the class to which the function belongs, scope resolution operator, function name, and argument declaration. Let us say the first function, read complex. The return type is void. The class to which read complex belongs is complex. Scope resolution operator. Function name is read complex. Since the function has no argument, just open the parenthesis, close it, open the brace. The purpose of read complex and write complex already I studied in our previous sessions. Read complex is to read the complex number or input the complex number. Write complex is to display the complex number in complex number format. So see how enter the real and imaginary part, see in real and image. So you are inputting the value for real and image of the any complex number. Next. Second function is write complex. That also belongs to the category of function without argument, without return value. No return type means void. Class to which the function belongs, complex. Scope resolution, function name, write complex. No arguments. Just open the bracket. See out real with the double quotes plus mark. It's the double quotes image. It's image, then with the double quotes I and end line. So it displays the complex number in A plus B IB format. Next, take the third function, add complex. Add complex function has two arguments of complex type, two objects of complex type, but no return value. The return type is void. Class to which the function belongs, complex. Scope resolution, add complex. Inside the bracket, you have to pass two objects as argument, complex C1 comma complex C2. So here we can observe that the two objects which are very much clear, very much visible to us are C1 and C2. In that case, what you do is In order to access the real and imaginary part of C1, you have to write it as C1.real or C1.image. Similarly, for C2, you have to write it as C2.real and C2.image. Whereas, where if you simply write real and image, that will be taken for C3 because the add function is called like C3 dot add complex inside the bracket C1 comma C2. So since the object before the dot operator is C3, therefore wherever you write real, it will be taken for C3 only. So real equal to C1 dot real plus C2 dot real. So since C1, C2 are visible, so for accessing the real part of first number, you have to write it as C1 dot real. Similarly, for the second one, C2 dot real. And you are storing the result in only real mean that will be taken for C3. Similarly, image means C3 dot image only equal to C1 dot image plus C2 dot image. So in this function, wherever I use the word simply real, that will be taken for the object through which the function add complex is called. Since you are calling the add function with C3, C3 dot add complex C1 comma C2 means wherever you write real and image, that will be by default taken for C3 only. Next function, subcomplex. That function also belongs to the category of function with argument and without return value. Return type is void, class name complex, scope resolution scope, then the function name subcomplex. Then you have to pass two objects as argument, complex C1 comma complex C2. Here also the objects which are visible are C1 and C2. Similar here also the function subcomplex is called like C3 dot subcomplex inside the bracket C1 comma C2. So the object you are using it to call the subfunction is C3. Therefore, for C3, we can directly take real and image. So real equal to C1 dot real minus C2 dot real. Similarly, image equal to C1 dot image minus C2 dot image. Now we have defined all the four functions outside the class. Next part is writing the main function. Void main complex C1 comma C2 comma C3 declare three objects of complex type. Then here the input are C1 and C2. The output object is C3. So C1 dot read complex, Cout enter the second complex number, C2 dot read complex. So you are calling the read complex function with C1 and C2. Next, you can display them using by calling C3, C1 dot write complex and C2 dot write complex. So the first complex number is C1 dot write complex. Cout, the second complex number is call again C2 dot write complex. So you are inputting two complex number, you display them. Next, you see how the add complex function is called. C3 dot add complex inside the bracket C1 comma C2. So I am calling the add complex function with the object C3 only. That's the reason in the add complex function, there I have written simply real equal to C1 dot real plus C2 dot real. Instead of that one, you have called the function is C4 dot add complex C1 comma C2 mean, then that real and image will be taken for C4. So next, sum of two complex number is, then the result is stored in C3. So call the write complex function with C3. Similarly, call the subcomplex function again with the two arguments C1 and C2, and you are by default you are using the object C3 to call the add subcomplex function. So the result is stored in C3. Now again call difference of two complex number is C3 dot write complex. So this is how we can pass objects as argument. Whenever you are passing objects as argument to a function, then at least while calling the function, you should use one object. So here the object I'm using it to call the add complex and subcomplex function is C3. So it is called like C3 dot add complex C1 comma C2. Similarly, subcomplex is C3 dot subcomplex C1 comma C2. So in C++, any object that is used along with the function, for that one, we can directly access the member data. On a similar basis, I will give one more example of create a class time with HH, MM, SS as member data. Use public function, read time, write time, and add time. In the previous example, it is add complex. Here it is add time. We know how to add two numbers, two times. In your high school, you have studied, given two times, first time containing 4, 20, 62. 4 hour, 22 minutes, 62 seconds. And second time, if you have, in order to add the two times, what's the logic? First, you add the second part. The second part is greater than 60. Add 1 to the minute part. Add the minute. If that is greater than 60, add 1 to the hour part. So that logic you already learned in your high school. Same thing, using it in the program. So class, time, private, int, HH, MM, SS. So HH, MM, SS are the member data of integer type. under the access specifier private. Under the public, in this program, we have three different functions. Read time. Similar to the previous example, it is read complex where we have read time, write time, and add time. So in the previous example, the class name is complex. Here the class name is time. So void add time, time comma time. So here the first function, read time, write time, belong to the category of function without argument, without return value. Whereas the last one belongs to the category of function with argument and without return value. All the three function prototype only I mentioned inside the class. Outside the class, you have to define it. Return type is void. Class to which the function belongs, time, scope resolution, read time. The purpose of read time is to input the value for HH, MM, SS. So CN, HH, MM, SS. Second function, return type is void, class name time, and the function name is write time. So extend cout hh, then with the double quote 2:mark, then with the double quote again 2:mark, and ss and end line. Next. Just similar to the previous example, in the case of add complex, return type is void. Here also return type is void. Here the class to which the function belongs is time, and add time, time t1 comma t2. Here also the member data are hh, ss. Since the objects which are visible to you are T1 and T2 means with respect to T1 and T2, you access them like T1.hh, T1.mm, T1.ss. Similarly for T2, T2.hh, T2.mm, T2.ss. Wherever you write simply hh, ss, that will be taken for T3. First, hh equal to equal to ss0. That means the hour, minutes, and the second time of hour, minutes, and seconds of the third time T3 is set to 0. So there I'm not using any object. Simply writing HH, SS means that will be taken for T3. Next. What you have to do is first you add the 2 seconds column. First seconds of the first time and the seconds of the second time. T1.ss plus T2.ss. You add the second column and store the result in SS means that now SS means T3.ss. Now after adding the seconds time, you check whether SS wherever you write simply SS means that will be for T3 only. So SS is greater than or equal to 60. If it is greater than or equal to 60, what you have to do? You have to subtract 60 from the second part. So SS equal to SS minus 60. SS means T3.ss. Next, what happens is minutes should be incremented. Plus plus means the minutes of the third time is incremented by 1. After that, what you do is minute is already incremented by 1 plus corresponding minutes of time 1 and the corresponding minutes of time 2 are added and the result is kept in means T3.mm. Now you check whether the minute part is greater than or equal to 60. If minute part is greater than or equal to 60, subtract 60 from the minute and add 1 to the hour. After that, you add what? Already hour is incremented by 1 min plus that one plus the hour of first time and the hour of second time. Complete result is stored in HH. Now we got SS, MM, and HH for the time T3. Now, just similar to previous example, you declare three objects T1, T2, T3. The input objects are T1 and T2, and the output object is T3. So T1.read time, T2.read time, T2.write time, T1.write time, and T2.write time. It should be T1.write time, then T2.write time. Next. In the previous example, you call the add complex like C3 dot add complex C1 comma C2. Here it is T3 dot add time T1 comma T2. Now the result is stored in T3. You call the write time with T3. So these are the two examples which illustrate how we can pass objects as arguments to function. But the function is not returning any value. So no return type. Next example is how objects can be written from the function. So here the return type is also object. Argument is also object. So this belongs to the category of function with argument and with return value. Same two example we can take. Class complex, private, float, real, comma, image, read complex, write complex, no need to explain again. Next. In this previous example, add complex function return type is void. But here the return type is complex because when you add two complex number, result will be one more complex number. Add complex. Previously, if there is no argument, if there is no return type, only argument is there. Then you have to pass two arguments. But here what happens is argument is also there, return type is also there. Means return type is also complex. Use only one argument, not complex. Because the add complex function is to call it with one of the object. Return type is one object, argument is one object, and to call that function, you have to use another object. But the return type object is C3, and the argument you are passing is C1 means, then you have to call the add complex function with C2. Or the return type is C3 and the argument you are passing is C2. In that case, add complex function should be called with C1 because a member function should be called through some object, either C1 or C2. If you are calling with C1 means C2 should be passed an argument. If you are calling with C2 means, then C1 should be passed as argument. First function, read complex, just similar to previous example, no need to explain again. Write complex also same thing. Third one is return type. What is the return type? Previous example, it is void, but here the return type is also complex. To class it belongs, that is also complex. Complex means first complex indicates the return type, second complex indicates the class name, scope resolution, add complex in the bracket, complex C1. So here I'm passing the argument is C1. In that case, you can call the add complex function with C2. And this function has a return type of complex 3. Then inside the bracket, you declare one more object called C3 of complex type. When you look at this declaration, here the objects which are visible are C1 and C2. In the previous example, the objects which are visible are C1 and C2. Therefore, wherever you write real and image, that will be treated for C3. Here the objects which are visible are C1 and C3. C3. In that case, wherever you write real and image, that will be taken for C2 because you have to call the add complex function with C2 object. So generally, add complex function in this case is called like this: C3 equal to C2 dot add complex C1 because return type is there, that is stored in C3. Add complex function should be called with one object, so I'm calling with C2 dot add complex, and you are passing one object C1 as argument. So complex C3. Now C3 dot real equal to C1 dot real plus real. Simply if you write real mean, that will be taken for C2. Similarly, C3 dot image equal to C1 dot image plus image. Here also just image mean for C2 dot image only. And here one statement is missing. It should be the last line. You add one extra line called return C3. Because after adding those two complex numbers, because the return type says there is a return type of complex type means the return object is C3. So last time before the closing that function add complex, you write return C3. Similarly, if you are writing one more function called subcomplex also, it is like this. Complex return type is because subtraction of two complex number is another complex number. Return type is complex, subcomplex in the bracket, complex C1 or C2. It's left to you. Then complex C3. C3 dot real equal to C1 dot real minus C2 dot real. C3 dot real equal to C1 dot real minus real. C3 dot image equal to C1 dot image minus image. And return C3. So complex C1, C2, C3. First call the read complex with C1, then call the read function with C2, then write the first complex number with C1 dot write complex, C2 dot write complex. So you see the way I'm calling the function. See, in the previous example, it is C3 dot add complex. Here it is C3 equal to C2 dot add complex inside bracket C1. So the object I am using it to call the function is C2. Therefore, in the function add complex, wherever you write real or image, that will be taken for C2 only. Then for C3 and C1, I have used explicitly the dot operator. Sum of two complex number is C3 dot write complex. Just exactly similar to the same basis, I have written the program of addition of two time also. Create a class time with hour, minutes, and seconds as member data. Again, no need to explain the declaration of private data. Read time also similar, write time is also similar, but add time is different. And add two time, it is another time. So return type is class object type, time, add time, and in the bracket, one object called time. So it has object as argument and object as return type. So whenever the function has both argument and return type, then only one object is enough here. No need to explain. Read time and write time, they are one and the same. Next, add time. Return type is time. The class to which the function belongs is time only. Add a time. Inside the bracket, I have taken T2. That means I'm calling the add time function with T1 here. Since the return type is there, the return type is T3. So time T3. How to add two times? Add the hours of the two times. Add the hours of two times. How to first add the seconds of two times. So T2.ss should be added to SS means T1.ss. The result you store it in T3.ss. Next, if the seconds of the third time, so here throughout this function with respect to T2 and T3, in order to access any member data, dot operator is a must. Whereas to access the member data for T1, dot operator is not required. So wherever writing only HS, MM, SS, that is for T1. Whereas for T2 and T3, I have to use the dot operator. So T3.hh equal to T3.mm equal to T3.ss equal to 0. So hour, minutes, and seconds of third time I will reinitialize to 0. Next, what you do here? Add the seconds of first time with the seconds of second time. How to access the seconds of first time? No need to write T1.ss. You can simply write SS. SS plus T2.ss. That you store it in T3.ss. Next, if the seconds of the third time is greater than or equal to 60, 6 subtract 60 from it and add 1 to the minute part. So T3.mm plus plus. Next, again add T3.mm equal to previous value of the T3.mm plus mm means it's T1.mm plus T2.mm. Then if the minute value is greater than or equal to 60, then subtract 60 from the minute part and increment the hours by 1. Then what happens? After finally, T3.h equal to T3.h, previous value of that one, plus hh, that is T1.hh plus T2.hh. Like add them. Then finally, you return T because return type is there. Next, time T1, T2, T3. T1, T2, T3 are the three objects of time class. First call the read time with T1, call the read time with T2, then call the write time with T2, call the write time, sorry, call the write time with T1 first, then with T2. So again, here also it is. T1 dot write time, T2 dot write time. Then see how it is called T3 equal to T1 dot add time T2. So the object you are passing is T2. The return object is T3. For calling the function, I'm using T1 main. Then for T1, no need to write the dot operator. Then finally, T3 dot write time. So this topic is a very, very important topic in the examination. At least one illustrative program they will ask. Illustrate with an example. How do you pass objects as function arguments in C++? Illustrate with an example. How do you return objects from member functions in C++? You can take either the complex number or you can take the example of time for both the example, for both the questions. Next. Dash operator is used to call a member function. Member function is called generally with dot operator. The correct answer is D. Object name dot the function name. Because you cannot call any of the member function of the class directly. You have to call with one object. Whichever object you are using for that operator, directly you can access the member data. Member function of a class is called through class, objects, variable, none of it. The general syntax is object name dot the function name. So it's called with objects. C++ allows passing any number of objects as arguments true. The correct answer is C. While defining a member function outside the class, dash must be mentioned within the class. Function name, return type, argument, prototype. The correct answer is prototype. So with this, today in today's class, we learned about two new concepts. One is how to pass objects as argument, and the second one is how to return object from a function. So with this, I will conclude today's session. For any doubt, you can call me over that number or through email. Okay, thank you.